Coming up, a bold prediction about a Georgia quarterback and an interesting projection about an Alabama running back. It's all on the way next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. So good to have you with us. We talk about the SEC here today. At the end of our show, we will get into this disaster at the College World Series last night for Arkansas. My heart goes out to the Hogs here. I hope it's redemption. I hope they get a chance to sort of get something back there. We'll talk about it later on, but what a disaster for our friends in the comment section who cheer for the Omahogs.
Also a disaster for my fellow bettors out there that had money riding on Arkansas to win that series.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I got stabbed in the heart last night.
So we'll talk all about that later on. For now, though, let's dive into our content here. Item number one on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I think this is really interesting. Bleacher Report had a quote from an NFL scout looking ahead to the 2020 draft, and compelling here for a couple of reasons. The scout seems to like the Georgia quarterbacks. The quarterback currently at UGA and the one that just left Georgia in the name of Jacob Eason, the former Gatorade Player of the Year who has since transferred to Washington. Let me show you the quote that Bleacher Report gets from this anonymous NFL scout about what could happen in the 2020 NFL draft. Bleacher Report quotes this scout as saying, "That kid at Georgia," he means Jake Fromm, "and the one that left," he means Jacob Eason, "are legit dudes. They could go 1-2 in the 2020 NFL draft, and they went to the same school. Those are the ones to watch." Now, I don't know how much we talk about Jacob Eason here because he's not in the SEC anymore. I guess there's a curiosity that maybe Eason and Fromm were on the same team and they're getting this kind of love from one scout at Bleacher Report. Let me zero in on Fromm here for a moment, then we can bring the Eason part of this in there. How does it land with you that a scout quoted by Bleacher Report, presumably a legitimate source here, how does it land with you that he says that Jake Fromm could eventually be one of the top two picks in the NFL draft? And if you want to look ahead to a 2020, which will be the first year that Fromm's eligible for the draft, what do you make of that?
I'm okay with it. And this, listen, we've had the topic about Fromm a million times on the show. What is Fromm? Where does he rank in terms of SEC quarterbacks? Is he, can he get the Heisman votes? My problem has never been with what Fromm could do. I mean, he is a pro-style quarterback. He's got a good arm. He's got good accuracy. He has the work ethic. He has the IQ. He checks off all the boxes. He checks off all the boxes you could possibly want when you're talking about an NFL caliber quarterback. My problem with him moving forward in these rankings is he's not asked to do a lot, at least not at Georgia, and I don't know what he's going to be asked to do in the near future. But when you look at size, stature, ability to play within a system, what he could possibly do around him, playing in a pro-style offense as a pro-style quarterback, I have no problem with looking 2 years down the road and projecting him.
Now, hold on now. I'm not going to try to put a lot of words in your mouth here. I'm not going to try to stir up trouble, but you have presented here on this show the notion of Jake Fromm as the kind of quarterback who's okay as long as you don't ask him to do too much. Both those things cannot be true. You can't be, and you can correct me if I'm sort of mischaracterizing your opinion. You can't be a quarterback that, well, he's okay as long as they don't ask him to do too much, let the running backs do their thing, and also be the number 2 pick in the draft. Those two ideas are kind of contradictory with each other.
I don't feel like I've ever questioned the fact that they don't ask him to do too much. I know what he's capable of, and we said it yesterday, said it a couple of days ago. He's got the accuracy, he's got the arm strength. I just don't think that they are going to ask him to do too much. I don't think that he's ever going to be. And you brought the point up that you think this is going to be a more pass-happy Georgia offense, and that's where we kind of meet in the middle. And I'm not so sure. From what I've seen in Kirby's blueprint, and obviously that has a lot to do with Nick Chubb and Sony Michel, from what I've seen from his blueprint and what he wants out of his offense, I don't think that Jake Fromm is going to be asked to do a ton. I don't think this is going to be a 4,000-yard passer anytime in his career.
And let me be clear. Obviously, people see the Georgia red and black. They may assume that I think it's a foregone conclusion that Fromm's going to be an early and very high first-round pick in 2020. The truth is, I think there's a lot of that remains to be seen. All I'm saying is that based on the perception, maybe I'm picking on you too much, but there are a lot of people who watch our show every day who seem to be kind of weighing in with similar comments on Jake Fromm of he's sort of okay. I would say that the label that gets tossed around when it comes to Fromm, I think erroneously, but I think it gets tossed around nonetheless. Some people call him a game manager. You can't be a game manager and then be the number 2 pick quarterback taken overall. So either over the course of the next couple of seasons, this scout's going to be proven to be way too hyperbolic with his description of Jake Fromm, or he's about to really take a big stride with his game and his career over the course of starting with this season and then the next year as well. I have suggested that I think that Georgia might throw it more. I don't know that they throw it a ton more, but I think that there is a chance that maybe Kirby believes in Fromm more than some fans think that Kirby ought to.
Well, and that's possible. And if you remember, too, this conversation started a lot. I think it was like a month ago that we talked about the project, or maybe not even that long ago. The AL.com comes out projection preseason, the SIDs were voting, and it was like preseason MVP was Jake Fromm at Georgia.
Yeah, that's right.
That was a head scratcher. I thought, MVP, like, what do we, what is Jake Fromm doing in terms of what Jarrett Stidham brings to the plate and what Drew Lock brings to the plate in terms of being the MVP? And listen, in the same column we're talking about, Jarrett Stidham was mentioned as being a very high draft pick and all those things. I look at it and say, listen, who knows what 2020's draft picks are going to be like and what quarterback's going to leave? Even if Jake Fromm at that point is even going to choose to leave college football. I mean, that's still only 3 years into his college career. But I think that if you're going to project that far, you're talking about the tangible things, the measurables, then I have no problem with Jake Fromm checking those off the list.
On Facebook, John Wilson says Fromm's not a game manager; he's a game changer. And I think that if you want to look at the Rose Bowl, I think that is an example of that. Against the Heisman Trophy winner Baker Mayfield, I thought that Fromm more than held his own there that day, and I guess that is some evidence of what he might grow into as a quarterback with more opportunities to throw the football. It's also worth pointing out here, if you want to bring Jacob Eason back into this discussion, for a coach who at the time he made the decision to sort of transition from the injured Eason to the true freshman Fromm, Kirby Smart was just one season into his coaching career then. He had to make a pretty tough choice, and in the sort of context of hindsight, maybe the choice is even tougher given the fact that a lot of draft scouts, or at least one draft scout quoted here, still likes Jacob Eason's pro chances a lot. This is two NFL quarterbacks. Kirby Smart was put in the position of having to choose one over the other. I think he handled it well, but it was clearly a difficult decision when he made it, right?
I think it was an incredibly difficult decision. And I think you had to take a guy who, listen, if it had been anybody other than Jake Fromm, it had just been somebody who was an athlete, that the sky was the limit and, all those things, then I think it would have been, a decision I don't know if he could have made. But Jake Fromm, you look at him, his head's on straight, he has the IQ, he has the work ethic, he has everything else. So I think you're right. I think Kirby managed that situation extremely well, especially when you talk about a guy in Jacob Eason who checks off everything on the list, other than obviously playing time in the last year.
Rick Keenan in the Facebook comment section, who is a Florida fan, says that it's going to be a sophomore slump for Jake Fromm. He references the fact that Fromm did not play well in this past spring's G-Day. And listen, while I am high on Fromm's future, I can't deny that. He did not have a great G-Day.
Right, yeah. And I think what's interesting about that is you multiply that with Justin Fields being on the same
That's
field.
Right.
And you do wonder. I mean, that's honestly the first question that popped in my head, and I wasn't trying to stir the pot. First question that popped in my head about Fromm being the 2020 first pick is, I don't even know if in 2 years Fromm's going to be starting quarterback at Georgia, right? I mean, it's something to look at.
But if you want to go back for a moment to the way that Kirby Smart handled the Fromm Eason decision, the two guys that a draft scout quoted by Bleacher Report think could go number 1 and number 2 in the 2020 draft, Kirby Smart actually spoke about this recently when he was on the sports radio station WJOX. He sort of explained his mindset in going away from Eason after he got hurt in the Appalachian State game and staying with Jake Fromm for the rest of the year. Here was Kirby Smart on that.
I think at the time I was worried about App State, who had a really good defense. It had played Tennessee really well the year before, and we were very concerned about their team. So it gave us a little momentum in that game, and I thought, well, this young guy came in and did a good job. But Jacob was going to get every opportunity to come back, and I thought he did. But I thought that Fromm kept improving, and that's what kind of put us over the top in the end, is the fact he got better game to game.
Zach Smith in our Facebook comment section says Fromm threw a huge touchdown to tie the game against Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl with 1 minute left to play. That's clutch if you ask me. I would agree with Zach on that. And I guess we don't talk a lot of NBA on this show, but if this projection would ever prove true when it comes to Eason and Fromm, it sort of reminds me of the situation that has recently kind of gone on with the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Right.
You look at recent NBA MVPs, you've got the reigning MVP right now, James Harden. Russell Westbrook's won an MVP award. Kevin Durant's won an MVP award. At one point in time, all three of those guys were teammates together at the Oklahoma City Thunder, almost like too much talent sort of not destined to remain together. Maybe one day the Eason, Fromm, Fields thing could be looked at the same way of, hey, you had these three guys together, but when you have that kind of talent clustered at one time, it's sort of hard to hold on to.
No, yeah, listen, to a much lesser extent, Bama fans have seen this at the running back. I mean, Alvin Kamara goes on to Tennessee. All of a sudden, he's exploding to the rookie of the year in the NFL and all those things, and shared a backfield with Derrick Henry and Bo Scarborough and T.J. Yeldon and all these guys are in the NFL now. So I definitely agree with you on that.
Speaking of the Alabama running backs, let's make them the subject of item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. ESPN recently highlighted the most underrated player for each of its preseason top 25 5 teams. And for Alabama, a running back does make the list as underrated, at least according to Alex Scarborough for ESPN. He highlights Damian Harris. Here's what Alex writes about Damian Harris. All Damian Harris has done is rush for 900 yards or more in each of the past 2 seasons. And yet he keeps getting overlooked. There's the Jalen Hurts Tua Tagovailoa debate, of course, but it's also Harris's understudy, Najee Harris, who has captured Bama fans' attention. All Damian keeps doing is racking up yards. You obviously follow Alabama as close as anybody. You got the script A on your shirt today. Is Damian Harris underrated?
I think he is, and that's hard for me to say. And I think he's actually underrated by Alabama fans. I mean, when you look at his numbers and look at the fact that he's had a couple of 1,000-yard, rushing seasons in a row, and if he had the amount of carries in his career that a guy like Derrick Henry had, there's no telling what would be. I mean, this guy didn't even get 200 carries last year, as opposed to what Derrick Henry had, like 395 a few years ago in his Heisman season. If he was to get that, he's going to blow away every career rushing record at Alabama by a mile if he were to get the number of carries. And so I do think it's always been, in my opinion, and I've never been able to get this, it's always been about somebody else. To me, Bo Scarborough was great down the stretch a couple of years ago. He's going to be crazy next year. Bo Scarborough had better odds than the Heisman Trophy leading into the year. Then it's always about Najee Harris. Boy, it's the number 1 recruit. He's got all the tools. Damian Harris has just quietly gone about his business. He's gotten better every year he's been at Alabama. He's more explosive than he's ever been. He's laterally quick. His top-end speed is crazy. I mean, I hate to say it, but I do think he's underrated.
Well, I will admit that I do think that Najee Harris is probably the better overall prospect, but as you've said, media's kind of fallen into that trap before. But if you want to start talking up Najee Harris here and listen to an ESPN claim that Damian Harris may be underrated, it sort of makes you wonder, are we ignoring the Alabama running backs too much? Because, I mean, listen, on this show, y'all know we're as guilty as anybody of focusing a lot on Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts, with good reason. I mean, it's just a juicy storyline. But when you think about the 2 Harrises and the collection of talent there for Alabama at the running back position, is this still in 2018 going to be a team that's dominated by its running backs, and are we just not talking about that enough?
No, I think they are. And that's one of the things that I've said all along. And we covered on Roll Tide Daily today, Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network saying Tua's going to win the Heisman in 2018. And it just blows my mind because I honestly feel the same way about that situation as I do Fromm at Georgia. It's like, yes, Tua could be great. Fromm could be great. Fromm might be the number 1 overall pick. But what these guys are asked to do within their scheme, I don't think it's going to change that much. I think Bama's going to throw the ball away more if Tua's a starting quarterback. But let's not remember what gets you there. It's time of possession. It's the running back committee. It's doing all these things on 3rd and short that really put some of these best teams over the hump.
Justin Pritchett on Facebook says Damian Harris is underrated. He's a gray back, but Najee's going to be unreal. That's one fan weighing in. I like Bo Molinari, though, who makes a pretty interesting point. Now, Bo's a Texas A&M fan, but on Facebook he says no one, and I mean no one, on Alabama's roster qualifies as being underrated. I mean, where do you land on what Bo has to say there? That's actually a pretty good comment. Where do you land on that?
It has to be taken in terms of what you're looking at, right? It has to be subjective in terms of being underrated. But it always has blown my mind that sometimes Bama has put all their eggs in one basket with a running back. Derrick Henry's a good example of that. Mark Ingram was the same way. And then sometimes it's running back by committee, and you get looked past when you're Damian Harris and some of these other guys. Damian Harris, for last year, I think he averaged like 8.5 yards a rush for most of the season last year. Absolutely ridiculous. But you almost never hear about him on a national scale. I think he's going to be a good part of the team this year.
Christopher P. Shooter Smith says Damian Harris is Mark Ingram 2.0. Like Mike said, give him the carries. And I guess that goes back to the point that Bo Molinari is also making a moment ago about, can an Alabama player still be underrated? Here's the reason why maybe an Alabama back can be underrated, why maybe Damian Harris sort of falls into that category. Let's go back to last October, where when Nick Saban spoke about Damian Harris, he gave him some praise, but did admit that he sort of artificially limits his carries as a way of kind of maintaining his health here. And maybe that obscures the spotlight that otherwise would be on Damian Harris. This is pretty fascinating from Nick Saban. Take a listen.
Damian's played really well for us this year. I think he's played really well for us in the past when he's been healthy. He's been able to stay healthy so far this year, makes good cuts, good decisions, runs the plays the way they're designed to be run, and he has good burst and acceleration when there is an opening, and he's made more explosive runs for us than anybody else on our team. But I still feel that in the long run, the way he's playing, the way we're using the backs, is probably the best thing for our team, because maybe one of the reasons that he is healthy and he's staying healthy and able to do what he's doing is because we're playing more guys at the position. He doesn't have to play as many plays, and I'd rather see him do that over the long haul of the season rather than start running them 30 times in a game and then all of a sudden he's not able to run at all. So I do, in all honesty, when we're standing on the sidelines and we got somebody that's hot, that's running well and making yards, I'm going to play that guy a little bit more. But still, I'm not going to try to kill the guy or wear him out.
So how does that land with running backs? They're going to get less fame and attention, but they're going to be maybe fresher for the important games of the season, and maybe most importantly of all, they're going to be fresher when it's time for them to start looking ahead to the NFL. If you're a Damian Harris, how do you feel about it?
I think what's funny about it to me is I know that Nick Saban definitely probably feels that way, but it's also a way to kind of, push things around. It's like, hey, Najee Harris, we're going to get Najee Harris carries, and you're telling Najee, hey, I'm going to get you the ball, and then you're also telling Damian, hey, listen, we're going to take some of that off your back. This is going to be good for everybody. I think the rushing yards for Damian Harris would go through the roof, but I do like that approach of, hey, listen, some of these most important games for Alabama are going to be in November. They are going to be hopefully in December and in January, and we'd love to have both these guys or all these guys fresh when it comes down to it. We don't even talk about Josh Jacobs. We don't even talk about Brian Robinson, who I think is going to be a great running back committee this year.
Are you high on Robinson? I wondered if Robinson, and he's from Tuscaloosa, right?
Very high on
I wondered if Robinson would ever play there.
No, listen, I've talked to people inside the program. Okay. I've talked to a number of people, make it 3 or 4 inside the program that think he's the best one of the whole group.
Yeah, now listen, Robbins was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. It was almost weird. He's like a top 100 player that got very little attention when he signed with Alabama in the class of 2017 because he was in the same class as Najee Harris.
He's going to be good.
That's kind of an interesting thing to hear there. All right, let's move on here to item number 3 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And you know that I like lists, I like rankings, I like preseason opinions. And the Big Lead, which is a sports blog, not college football focused, but one that still is pretty good. They came out with their top 10 coaches in college football. 3 SEC names make the list. Dan Mullen comes in at number 10. Kirby Smart comes in at number 8. Nick Saban, as you might imagine, number 1 overall. Now, I don't know what jumps out at this list to you, but for me, I sort of find it interesting that Gus Malzahn is not on the list of top 10 coaches. Given the salary that he makes, he just signed a huge extension that's going to pay him more than $7 million a year. Given that he's won an SEC championship, he's been in a national championship game, which is essentially the same thing that Kirby Smart did at Georgia last year. Right. And I would say that if you want to put the Mullen, who is on the list, number 10, Malzahn, who isn't on the list, side-by-side comparison, the Gus Malzahn career seems much more distinguished.
Yeah.
Is Malzahn snubbed by not being in the top 10 here?
I don't think there's any doubt. And listen, I know that it's the inconsistencies in Gus Malzahn's tenure, and I've pointed to it a million times, and I don't understand why the inconsistencies are there. But I think that when you line him up next to a Dan Mullen, the things that he's done as opposed to what Dan Mullen have done to me are not even comparable. I mean, this is a Gus Malzahn who's taken a team as an offensive coordinator and won a national title. He's been to a national championship as a head coach. He's been to a number of SEC championship games as a head coach. He's got a Heisman Trophy winner in Cam Newton as an OC. And obviously Dan Mullen's got a couple of those boxes as well as an offensive coordinator. He's got, obviously all those things back with Urban Meyer. But Gus Malzahn, to me, has kind of treaded his own path as a head coach on a national stage. As good as I think Dan Mullen is, I don't think he's gotten there yet on a national stage as a head coach.
So Katie McCarty, echoing what you were talking about, and this has come up a lot, that Katie says, what does Mike always say, B.A.? Malzahn is the most inconsistent coach in the country, and it sounds like this commenter and you say that's the reason why he's disqualified from this list. Yeah. But as a way of playing devil's advocate, I mean, I do think that Kirby Smart's one of the 10 best coaches. Certainly, there aren't 10 coaches that Georgia would rather have more than Kirby Smart. So from that standpoint, I think he belongs in the top 10. But if I wanted to argue the other side of this for a moment, I'd say, well, we don't really know that yet about Kirby Smart. Right. I mean, it's 2 years for him. Why should he, get credit for the unknown, whereas Malzahn's going to get dinged for the known? What we also know about Malzahn at his best is here pretty good, right?
Right. No, listen, and I'm taking Kirby over Malzahn as well. And we ranked our head coaches on SEC Country Live last week when Brandon Walker was on here. Me and him went back and forth. Brandon Walker had Dan Mullen as his number 2 coach in the SEC last week, and it was a head scratch for me.
I don't buy that.
I don't buy that either. And here's the thing. It's consistency. People want consistency. I say this about Vegas all the time. The reason Bama always gets the benefit of the doubt in these spreads is because Nick Saban's consistent. They know what the product they're getting on the field is. Gus Malzahn, you go out there and you beat the number 1 team in the country 3 weeks apart, and then you lose to UCF or you lose to LSU on the road, and you do some things that just leave you scratching your head, and you don't have the consistency. Kirby Smart has not only established the consistency, but by a mile, in my opinion, has obviously started to out-recruit what either Gus Malzahn or Dan Mullen's been doing.
Grindhard on YouTube says, through their first 2 years as SEC head coaches, Kirby and Gus did the same thing. And Gus was working with a 3-9 team. In other words, saying that what Malzahn did in 2013 more impressive than what Kirby Smart did in 2017 here. Also, Joshua Rogers on YouTube says Malzahn's a quality coach, but he has had some issues. The 2015 season is example A. So I'll be the first to tell you, and y'all know I'm not an Auburn fan. It seems weird that I'm sort of in a position to argue for Auburn here. It's really more against Dan Mullen that I'm arguing on behalf of Gus Malzahn and not Kirby Smart. But to mention the disappointment of 2015, and it was just a disastrous season for Auburn. Is that Auburn's fault for not being good, or the media's fault for hyping them up so much in the offseason? And I mean this in all.
No, I mean, understand.
How much can you blame Auburn for what the media said is going to be a great team?
Right.
I mean, that was sort of apropos of nothing for the most part.
And listen, I think it's a little bit of mix of both. I think you have to look at the media looks at the talent, you look at who's returning, you look at the experience, and you say, okay, they should be this. But Gus Malzahn, as inconsistent as he's been in time, you say he's just not getting there. And I think that's what, for lists like this, I think that's what people tend to focus on. I do want to tell you a story real quick because it's coming up in the YouTube comment section. Logan Westman makes the point that he thinks that Kirby Smart's going to jump to the NFL within the 5 years. Just a little bit of a self-promotion. We had William Vallejos, who's been a part of the Alabama staff the last few years, on Roll Tide Daily today.
Please.
He brought up the question. He said he asked Kirby Smart point blank, do you ever want to go to the NFL? This is before he went to Georgia. And he said no. He said, I value actually raising my family in the South, and there's just not enough NFL teams in the South for me to ever try to make that jump to the NFL.
Oh, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I'll look forward to checking out that episode. And I guess the other thing I'd say to this is, we've seen this with Jim Harbaugh, and I don't want to get lost in this tangent here, but Harbaugh is the coach of the San Francisco 49ers, won 44 games in 4 seasons. That's 11 games a year over the course of a 4-year stint there with the San Francisco 49ers. That is a successful NFL coach. Went to a Super Bowl, Colin Kaepernick to a Super Bowl, for goodness sake. I mean, that's a successful coach, and yet when he had a chance to go to Michigan, he went there. Now, his recruiting is kind of fallen off a bit as of late. This is a guy who goes to Michigan and has success as a recruiter, and it seems like he said, for me, the hard-driving personality that I am, going to college football is sort of a better fit for my personality. This is obviously wishful thinking on my part, but it seems like Kirby's just more wired for college than he is the NFL. The recruiting part of the game, which is a turnoff for some, the reason why they do go to the pros, it's a reason for Kirby to never want to go there because the draft system is sort of designed to create parity, whereas recruiting is great if you're greedy.
Right, and that's the same reason Nick Saban turned right back around and came back to college football. And it's not that they're not good football coaches. It's that you realize your skill set in a lot of different ways is more key to being a part of the college game. You can chop it up, the word I love to always use, and the word some of these recruits have used in terms of Jeremy Pruitt. You can get to know these kids, and you can be a part of their life, and you can be a part of their life for 4 years and mold them into young men, and then you get a new crop. And it's not like, hey, we've got the same quarterback for 15 years.
All right, Josh Burdett in our Facebook comment section. We've also had a couple people mention this. The idea about Muschamp being on this top 10 list. Steady improvement at South Carolina. I rank Muschamp high. I do. I've said this a million times. If you give me my choice between Dan Mullen or Will Muschamp, I want Will Muschamp every day of the week. I just think that Muschamp is a very underrated coach here, but he's not going to get national attention yet. There's too much stench left over from the failure at Florida, and other than some good recruiting classes, it was a failure for Will Muschamp at Florida. I think if you want to start looking at these kinds of lists in the future, I think Muschamp's probably on it. But I'm not surprised the national media is not noticing that yet. It's not been enough success at South Carolina yet. I think one day it may come. It's not been enough success yet, and there's too much memory left over of what happened at Florida. He's a better coach than the national media realizes, but the national media is just not going to give him credit right now.
Yeah, and Jamie Blanton's bringing up some numbers in the comment section, and I do think that, and listen, you tell me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of how I sum up Will Muschamp. I think Will Muschamp did not succeed at the University of Florida when it was absolutely a league that was ripe for the taking. I think if Will Muschamp really was a great head coach and was able to get teams to the next level, then the years he was at Florida, and really, a couple of the years he's been at South Carolina, the SEC East has been ripe for the taking. And yet Will Muschamp has not been able to grab onto that for whatever reason. Has he recruited well? Absolutely. Has he had great defenses? Absolutely. But it takes everything. And for Will Muschamp and the era and time that he's been in the SEC East for what? This is going on his 7th year in the SEC East. I just don't feel like he's been able to grab that.
But you understand this, though. He just wasn't ready, right? He's at South Carolina. He wasn't quite ready. He was the coach in waiting at Texas for Mack Brown. Florida plucked him away to be their coach. And you know what? A lot of guys do better the second time around. There's a huge trend of that in the NFL. Second-time head coaches, people call them retreads, but the honest truth is, on that second set of treads on the tires,
right,
a lot of these guys actually end up doing a lot better.
And I still think the opportunity is there for that. And I would never discount, and you and I have talked about it a ton, I think Will Muschamp looks as comfortable as he ever has as a head coach right now at South Carolina. I would never discount that. But it's time, for Will Muschamp in terms of being in these top 10 lists, it's show me time, right? It's hey, get these big wins. Start knocking off some of these big name opponents.
All right, let's mention Bo Molinari here, who does bring up Jimbo Fisher on this. National media is willfully ignoring A&M in the Fisher coup. That means A&M getting him in terms of, he's referencing Fisher not being in the top 10 here. If you'd done this list a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I think Jimbo Fisher's obviously on it.
Yeah.
At one point in time, I think Fisher would probably be, honestly, Dabo Swinney's in the spot that Jimbo Fisher used to have.
Right.
At like number 3 behind Urban Meyer and Nick Saban. Folks don't like the way it ended for Fisher at Florida State. Now, I'm telling you right now, despite that weird comment about Kevin Sumlin's office, I still like Jimbo Fisher for Texas A&M. But right now, the national media has backed off of Jimbo a little bit because it did not end pretty at Florida State.
Yeah,
I think it was a great hire for A&M, but the national media has backed off here.
Right, and he's also hitting the reset button. Really, career-wise, he's kind of hitting the reset button and saying, hey, listen, I'm going to go start over at a program. I don't know what you're going to get in year one. I'm going to make sure I turn this thing around. It's going to be a different kind of feel there at Texas A&M. But I understand why these teams have backed up. I still had Jimbo Fisher as my number 3 head coach in the SEC, right nipping at the heels of Kirby Smart. And I think
that'd be a fun. Did y'all do that when I was on vacation?
We did that last Thursday.
That's a fun thing. Yeah.
And I think that Jimbo Fisher, just in my opinion, and I said that. I said if last year hadn't happened the way it did for both sides, then Jimbo Fisher and Kirby could have easily flipped. But last year did happen.
What's funny is I'm monitoring the comments of both the YouTube and the Facebook. I mean, people hate Malzahn and they hate Jimbo Fisher. There is some vitriol being spewed at both those coaches right now. And it's not necessarily from Alabama people or whoever A&M's biggest rival in the SEC is. It's just sort of a general, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know, skepticism about these two guys as men, by the way, not coaches, as men.
Yeah. Well, and listen, this is the Bama fan in me talking about this. Malzahn tends to get that kind of talking out of the side of his mouth, and kind of gets that southern drawl, and a lot of people look at it and kind of shake their head. The Jimbo thing, I know exactly what that's rooted in. Jimbo Fisher spent 3 or 4 years talking about how the SEC wasn't as good as it's chalked up to be. Boy, the ACC is incredible right now. He's a year ago at ACC Media Day.
We see this in politics all the time. You argue whatever side you think the winning side is. I mean, do we have to do the whataboutism? Like, oh, this is what you said 2 years ago. Everybody says whatever they got to say to win in the moment.
I agree, but I mean, I think that's why he doesn't get the benefit of the doubt in the public eye. It's like, dude, listen, you're new here. I mean, you're the new man on the block here.
This may be my favorite topic on the show. It's item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. There is a show called Pardon My Take. It's a part of the Barstool sort of network here. You may have heard it at some point in time. Pretty funny. They have on former Mississippi State quarterback, current Dallas Cowboys quarterback, Dak Prescott. And listen, this is just scratching me right where I itch because I'm a little bit of an NFL hater. I just think I'm a little bit of an NFL hater.
That's great.
So when they asked Dak Prescott about hey, what's tougher, the NFL stadiums or the SEC stadiums?
Right.
I mean, there's a part of me that just, I want to lather in this and bathe in this. Listen to a great answer from Dak Prescott on comparing SEC stadiums to NFL stadiums. Take a listen.
What's more difficult, playing a road game in the NFL or playing a road game in the SEC?
Probably playing a road game in the SEC. SEC is just a little bit louder, more passionate fans. They've kind of embraced that role as being the SEC, being known for the loud stadiums and everything that comes with that.
So this is the thing that I've always assumed was true, but I do have to defer to you on this a little bit because you can obviously answer this question. You played a long time in the NFL and you played in the SEC earlier than Dak Prescott, but the eras are close enough here. And I should also point out that I've been lucky enough a couple of times to watch a game from the field. Folks, if you've never seen a game from the field, the sound is so different.
It's different.
Loud in the stadium, but something about the way that bounces off the ground. Yeah. I mean, you can really
Everybody's
feel
focused.
Yeah, it's all coming to you right here. You can really feel that rumble under your feet, which is, to me, great. I get chills even thinking about it. But that's both for the stadium I love and the other ones that I've visited. They're all very similar in that regard. But you played the big-time SEC stadiums,
right.
The NFL stadiums. Is Dak Prescott right? Are SEC stadiums louder than NFL stadiums? And you better give the right answer.
He's right. He's definitely right. And listen, I played in the loudest of loud NFL stadiums. I did. Kansas City.
Yeah, it's a loud one.
Tony Gonzalez was making his return back to Kansas City that day. I've played up in Seattle a few different times in Seattle and listened to that crowd really kind of before they were really good under Russell Wilson, but kind of in that change around under Pete Carroll. Listen, the Superdome down in New Orleans, when the Falcons roll into there, that is not a quiet place at all. But week in and week out, there's just a little bit more passion. There's no other way to say it. There's just a little bit more passion from the college football fans. Not only that, but I think there's more youth. Also, you have the student sections. You have a little bit more of a younger crowd and people that want to yell at the top of their lungs and lose their voice for the next week. So it's closer than a lot of people realize. Listen, the Minnesota Vikings Stadium absolutely shaking when people are screaming. But it's definitely, for me, it's a runaway by the SEC.
Jeff Crawford in the comment section says, I'm glad these people go to the games. It allows me to sort of sit at home, and he says, it lets me watch the games in my air conditioning with my beverage of choice. And I get that. Not everybody goes to the stadiums and creates that environment and atmosphere. But for me, it's going to be a long time before going to these SEC stadiums goes out of style for me.
Yeah.
Now, I'm lucky enough that I'm able to sneak into some of these buildings from time to time. Some of these ticket prices these days, if I'm paying these tickets, I can't afford to go. I have been priced out a lot of the big games, especially some of the ones that Georgia played a year ago, so I won't deny that I'm lucky in that regard. But as long as I can sort of beg, borrow, or steal my way into one of these games, I love being in that SEC atmosphere. I just do.
I think you bring up a good point, saying that some of the more passionate fans are priced out. And it happens in the NFL too, but you still have student tickets in college football, right? You still have these student tickets these students can get for $25, $30 a game in a lot of these places. And you also have away games, in every NFL stadium, for the most part brings their own fans. You also have places, Vanderbilt, you can go to some of these away games and still buy tickets at a decent price.
Frank Crowder says, well said, Dak Prescott. The reason why I prefer college over the NFL, and it's a big reason why I feel the same way. If you flip over to like the Red Zone channel or something like that on a Sunday at 1 p.m., I live in Atlanta. Atlanta's a classic example of this. Atlanta's sort of been, and I use air quotes here, sold out for how many years in a row with their games? Turn that thing on at 1:15 when they've kicked off and they're playing. You got just huge swaths of empty seats. Yeah. And the SEC so far, you really don't have that. Now maybe one day it's all a bunch of corporate, non-fans and sort of see and be seen types. But for now, even for the expensive tickets, the people that are buying them for the most part real fans, which is for me a really cool thing.
Yeah, no, and listen, as much as I love Atlanta and I love the Atlanta Falcons organization and their fans, I don't think anybody really fears coming to Atlanta to play, a football game. The Cowboys come in, it's half Cowboys fans. Packers come in, it's half Packers fans. A lot of these fans do come to Atlanta as a place. First of all, it's easy to fly into, but I don't know that any of the other teams really fear coming to play the Falcons at home.
Jared Seeger says, "BA, what do you think about Death Valley? It smells like corn dogs." I know that's the long-time joke. I've actually never been to a game at Death Valley. I'm hoping to get a chance to see one.
Gotta go this year, man.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get a chance to see one.
Yep, I'll be going down there this year.
Yeah, hoping. By the way, speaking of Death Valley and these other SEC stadiums, obviously being good journalists, the folks at Pardon My Take wanted to dive in and find out from Dak Prescott. So which of these SEC stadiums is the loudest, is the toughest? And Prescott gave a pretty interesting answer. Take a listen.
What's the toughest place to play in the SEC?
I don't know. They're all pretty tough. When you're traveling on the road and you're number one going into Alabama, or when you're going and playing in Death Valley at night, those are some tough games. But I tell you, Auburn has something about it that was just always a fun atmosphere, a great atmosphere. The fans are eye level with you, and that can be an incredible game at night as well.
So it's, first of all, when you listen to that comment, it's sort of hard to believe. You almost think, wait, they were number one in the country in 2014.
Yep.
They did in November go to Bryant-Denny Stadium as the number one ranked team in the college football playoff poll. And that is almost impossible to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. No, we talked about Dan Mullen and really what his tenure was, what the good things as a head coach that Dan Mullen's able to do. That's at the top of them. When you talk about his time at Mississippi State, really that run they had there through October, an incredible run.
Good comments. Malachi Morgan on Facebook says, keep in mind most of the main SEC stadiums are bigger than almost any NFL stadium. And also kind of along those same lines, Zach Smith says, hey, every game matters in the SEC, which is not the case in the NFL, which is part of the reason why that's all true. And I will be effort at full disclosure here. I've been in some very loud NFL venues. Seen a game in Philadelphia that's a loud crowd. I mean, there are obviously loud NFL stadiums. I was at Soldier Field for a game in September. That's, I guess, loud enough. But a perfect example here. I mean, I had been, a million SEC games, and you go to that Sunday Chicago game, you're like, this is not exactly what I'm used to here. Not exactly what I'm looking for.
And another thing to kind of bring up in that topic of conversation is, if you're playing in the SEC, your schedule's all going to be right here, right? Not right here, but it's going to be in the Southeast. The Falcons go to L.A., the Falcons go up to New York, the Falcons go out to Seattle, and they play Green Bay, and there's a lot more travel involved. People can get in their car and their drive to any SEC game.
Matt Merle has a funny comment in the Facebook comment section. It's kind of off topic. He says, "Happy Monday, guys. The day at work has been so bad that it must be a Monday." Well, Matt, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but I'm glad you're part of what we're doing here on SEC Country Live here today, and certainly we'll try to take your mind off of what may have been a sort of Monday-like conditions for you there at work today. Let's move on now to item number 5 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So we talked a little earlier about underrated players. We mentioned, Damian Harris for Alabama. A couple of other SEC names that sort of show up on this list from ESPN with their preseason top 25. And I kind of want to pit these two guys against each other a little bit. I've got the Texas A&M linebacker Terrell Dotson, who shows up as the most underrated player for the preseason ranked Aggies, at least according to ESPN, and Brian Edwards, the most underrated player for the preseason ranked South Carolina Gamecocks. Now, ironically, Dotson and Edwards will match up head-to-head. These two teams play each other every single season. But of these two SEC stars, which is the most underrated in your mind?
No, and this is tough. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. This one's a tough one for me. And both these guys I'll be watching very closely throughout the season. I think they're very closely when you measure them in terms of what they are at their position, what they have around them in terms of their position groups, what they have around them in terms of offensive or defensive groups. But I look at the teams as a whole, and I really think Dotson, at the end of the season, you match him up with Alaka, you match him up with Elko, the new defensive coordinator at Texas A&M. I think that's going to be a name we're talking about a lot this year. I think Texas A&M, starting the U-turn that is Texas A&M, obviously they've been good on offense, starting the U-turn that is Texas A&M, really paying attention to what they're trying to do defensively. Give me Dotson in this one too. And honestly, it's nothing against Brian Edwards. I think the Deebo Samuel is very special. I think Brian Edwards fits nicely as a number 2. But Dotson is the anchor of that defensive group for me right now watching Texas A&M.
So let me speak about this. I know I'm hearing some people in the Facebook comment section. I guess we're frozen on Facebook. Do we know anything about that at all? You can switch over to YouTube. The YouTube seems to be working fine, I'm thinking. I don't think we're having any issue there. It looks like people are kind of bumping over to Facebook, and I should say to YouTube. It's good to see you. We'll see if we can get the Facebook situation cleared up there. But hop on over to YouTube if you're having an issue, and it looks like a lot of you are doing just that. Let me respond to the idea about Brian Edwards and Dotson, the linebacker here. I want to call Edwards the most underrated between the two, but there's also a point I want to make about Dotson. For me, Edwards is underrated here because of the way that I think South Carolina is going to try to use its wide receivers here this year. Right. It's actually a strength for that team. I like Deebo Samuel. I think Edwards on the other side there is a pretty tough guy to deal with. And there's some secondaries in the SEC that I think that South Carolina can take advantage of. You know that I'm a little bit skeptical about whether or not the Gamecocks are really going to be as up-tempo offensively as Will Muschamp and Dan Werner and Brian McClendon say they want to be, but that's still a pretty good wide receiver core. I expect big things there. For Dotson, I don't know if he's underrated or not. I would put him in the category of important, and really almost any of those sort of top-end Aggie defenders I sort of feel that way about. I mean, Dotson's the one that's got the sign on his back to help usher in Texas A&M to a new era of just being more physical. Just being more physical. Yeah. If you're an A&M fan, that's what you really want.
Well,
right?
that's kind of my point in saying which one's more underrated. I think they're both right on par with each other, but by the end of the year, I think if all goes according to plan for both these schools, if by the end of the year Texas A&M and South Carolina both do as well as these fan bases are hoping they do, then at South Carolina, I think you're just talking about Deebo Samuel more. And for that reason, that's why I give the nod to Dotson as being the most underrated. I think that he's got to be the leader, the glue of that defense in 2018.
So it looks like the Facebook problems are back. It looks like many of you got very, very impatient while it was an issue. But we are back on Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube, we're glad to have you. We'll try to just keep you happy whichever side you're on. But I guess that can be a little bit frustrating there. So thanks for kind of toggling back and forth with us. And maybe some of y'all will rejoin us on Facebook here in just a moment. For now, though, let me do item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Pretty interesting recruiting story here as Tennessee goes into Starkville, Mississippi to get 3-star defensive end Jaleel Clemens. Clemens making this official on his Twitter account, saying 108%. Wow. That's a brand new threshold of mathematical achievement sort of unlocked here by Jaleel Clemens. He gives you the hashtag GBO, Vol for Life, committing to Tennessee, and he gives the traditional thank yous there. How big of a win is this for Tennessee to go in Starkville and pull out Jaleel Clemens?
I think it's big. I'm not saying this is the really key cog in this signing class for Tennessee. I don't think it's even close to being that. But This is another reminder to me, and I try to go down this route with Florida. I know Florida fans will jump on me about this, about what I said about Florida's recruiting class. But this is Jeremy Pruitt, in my opinion, trying to identify guys that not only fit with his program, but guys he can get on board. And if you got to go into Starkville, Mississippi to get one of those guys, then I'm okay with Jeremy Pruitt doing this. I don't think by any means that this is one of the the top 10 signees in their class, but this is a nice piece for them in my opinion.
And there's this thing about Tennessee sort of always staying in the news here, which I think is interesting.
Right,
I mean, you don't really go very long without seeing Tennessee sort of pop up here in terms of, hey, we got to recruit, we got to commit. And is this the kind of thing that's going to sort of like they're going to hang a banner because of Jaleel Clemens? I don't know about that yet. This is not a player that I necessarily know a ton about. But when you go into another SEC town and pull him, there's always something kind of exciting about that. And you read about him as his profile as a player. He's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife here. He's kind of considered a strong side defensive end. I think it's fair to say that most, maybe more so than any other position, and the X's O's better than I do, most strong side defensive ends, that's like the position you're sort of least likely to also play in college. You either sort of drop down, become a outside linebacker pass rusher, or if you're big enough, you sort of slide over and become that inside guy here. It seems like Clemens may be more of the pass rushing style. There's, I think, a lot to like about him. Certainly there's plenty that he likes about Tennessee. He was actually recently on our Tennessee podcast for SEC Country, and he sort of went into his explanation from why it was that he chose the Vols. And if you're a Tennessee fan sort of just now getting up to speed on Jaleel Clemens, you'll certainly like his assessment of the situation in Knoxville. Take a listen to this.
I just felt like it was a spot for me. Because they can help me on and off the field. It's a great school, great history. Everybody on the defensive side of the ball, they won a lot of national championships. All them coaches, they won a lot of national championships. They've been in the positions. They know they got connections with NFL teams.
Jared Seeger.
They got all the connections, and they just perfect coaching staff. They know what they're talking about.
Jared Seegers in our Facebook comment section reminds us that since he's only 108% committed, that means he's not 110% committed, which means he could be open for a flip.
Right.
Which is kind of a funny line from Jared.
Yeah, no, Willie G. McGuire says in the YouTube comment section, 108% chance the UT commits are second guessing first week of the season. After they
That's
play
also a pretty funny line.
Yeah, that's definitely
But hey,
good.
if you're a Tennessee fan, you'll love this. A bold prediction from Clemens about what he thinks the future for the Vols is. He's thinking about championships. Take a listen to this.
They putting together a national championship winning team. They got the coaches for it all, recruiting the players for it. We want to get a natty.
I mean, listen, what else is the kid going to say when he commits
it.
to school?
Yeah.
But you can't help but like that. It's really unbridled passion from Clemens.
Well, what that says to me is that Jeremy Pruitt's message is hitting home, right? And Jeremy Pruitt's message is, hey, we're building a national championship winning team. Hey, we're going to talk about these coaches. How many times have we shown videos of the assistant coaches at Tennessee? Jeremy Pruitt's message, at least for Jaleel Clemens, is hitting home in terms of what he's trying to sell these recruits. You don't always hear that. Hey, listen, the university speaks for itself. I'm going to go there and try to be in a long line and a lineage. No, this is Tennessee saying, hey, listen, we're coming here. The same thing came out of Wanya Morris's mouth when he committed as an offensive
that's
tackle.
true.
Hey, listen, I'm going to be the cornerstone. I want to be something different. I'm going to go up to Tennessee and be a part of this.
Jared Seegers, now this is just not nice. I mean, here we are. It's a rainy Thursday in Atlanta. We're trying our best to handle everything here. We got a couple technical issues, and we had a Facebook freeze-up situation a moment ago. Does this seem fair to you? Jared Seegers says BA's head is blocking the satellite signal. Listen, you don't think I know I got a big head? You don't think I know?
That's good stuff right
See,
there.
what y'all can't see is what I see every day during the show. So when I look here, I can see my head on my monitor, Mike's monitor. We've got another big monitor right over here that shows
that's
everything.
good stuff.
I see my head in like 3 different places at the same time in the show, and all I'm thinking is, oh, boy, that's a big old noggin.
Yeah.
So thanks, Jared, for pointing that out.
I got a big one too, man. What size hat do you wear? Do you know?
I mean, at this point in time, I'm no longer in the 7s. I'm in the 8s.
I'm knocking on the door.
I gotta be in the 8s now. That's why I like the snapback hats. Big snapback hat.
No,
guy.
I hate them.
I'm also a dad hat wearer, like the golf hats. That's my hat of choice right now. Now
can't find 'em to
they
fit
never
me.
look good because they just sort of look like I have sort of like a cocktail napkin draped over the top of my head. But that's always kind of my move.
Yeah, Ty Fam's kind of taking up for you in the YouTube comment section. Says big brain, BA.
Thank you, Ty.
Yeah,
I
that's
certainly
exactly
appreciate
right.
that. Hey, let's keep the recruiting theme going here for a moment. Mention a commit for Alabama here for its class of 2019, going up to Washington, D.C. and grabbing a running back. Keelan Robinson is the young man's name from the D.C. area here. Let me show you some of his commitment video as he makes it official for the Alabama Crimson Tide here. What do you make of Robinson? It's worth pointing out that Alabama's kind of gone out of the South for backs before, went to California for Najee Harris as an example of that. What do you like about Keelan Robinson's game?
Yeah, Michigan for Mark Ingram. Went to Flint, Michigan to get Mark Ingram, and obviously kind of fits along the same lines.
Don't drink the water.
Yeah, don't drink the water up there in Flint, Michigan. But
that's not funny.
Yeah, it's not funny. But I think this is a guy. I think what's interesting to me about this is two things. First of all, this guy's had an offer for a few months, but he got on campus 2 weeks ago and it became committable. Evidently, Alabama really liked what they saw and getting him on campus. Said, hey,
because I mean, just to be completely honest, I mean, we're very candid around here. This is a lower rated running back in Alabama.
It is. And it goes along the same lines of what we were just talking about with Jaleel Clemens at Tennessee. It's like
if I saw the 24/7 profile correct, and I have no idea what I'm talking about in this. He's only the second rated running back in Washington, D.C.
In D.C., yeah.
It's sort of a strange thing.
In the District of Columbia.
Who is the other running back that is not going to Alabama in that case?
Yeah, no, it is. It's interesting. He's, I think, the number 18 running back in the country. And so, listen, I think this is a case of Alabama trying to get the player they like. And they've done this before, trying to reach for people. This is the same thing with Eddie Smith, last year's DB out of Louisiana. True. You go in and get a 3-star guy. This obviously being a good guy. I think the other angle to look at this is for Alabama fans is, you remember we talked about Michael Locksley and him getting promoted to offensive coordinator. This is the third commit he's got out of that area. He's got 2 out of Maryland. He's got another one out of D.C. He's been going up there cleaning up with what he needs to do.
Katie McCarty also taking a little bit of a inquisitive look at little low. I mean, Alabama has their evaluations this recruiting cycle. Now they've hit with plenty of big name guys too, but their evaluations are starting to be a bit unique here. They're not looking at a lot of these prospects the same way that some of the other major programs are.
I agree, and it's been interesting to me to find. I mean, remember Alabama didn't really sign a running back last year. I mean, they had some athletes, they had some other guys you can move around, but this is, if you're going to pick one to come out with, this was an interesting one.
And I'm going to speak. You got the 3 big guys in the South right now. John Emery is only a few days away from making his college decision. Actually, it looks like Mississippi State may be the leader for the back out of Louisiana there. You have the 2 IMG kids, Noah Kane and Trey Sanders. I know Alabama's tried to be in the mix for both those. I won't pretend to know if taking this commitment takes you out of the running for the IMG guys. The truth is I don't know. But those are the 3 backs we talk about during the South, the whole bunch. It's kind of interesting that Bama goes up to the Beltway for this young man who may be the next Walter Payton.
No, it's interesting to me too. Trust me. I start counting a little bit. And this is Bama who I think this is either their 18th or 19th commitment. Remember, they only signed 19 people last year total at Alabama. So you look at it and you start thinking, okay, they really still want Kayvon Thibodeau. They're really still talking to Trey Sanders. Start going down the list. John Mechie's another guy that they're really after that's going to make his decision coming up soon. You do start counting in a lot of different ways. You're Alabama saying, boy, I wonder what they're really thinking and projecting.
Well, you also see this thing of, and this is not an accusation against Alabama because a lot of programs do this, there's this thing of sort of like placeholder commits. It's like, okay, we got 19 commitments. You better hurry up and get on board here.
Yeah.
But somehow magically 10 of those guys end up not signing in Alabama for whatever reason. And that's not a specific criticism of Alabama. There are a lot of programs that have a lot of decommitments. So there's still a lot of stuff going on here. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. But Alabama does add a 2019 running back, at least for right now. All right, let's talk about the Auburn Tigers here for a moment. Item number 8 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And one of the things we've had some fun with on today's show is this ESPN list from their preseason top 25 of underrated players for each of these programs. And the name that shows up for Auburn as underrated is the defensive lineman Dontavius Russell. Here's the explanation from ESPN about why Russell Raids is underrated. Alex Scarborough says you'd think a 6'3", 320-pound lineman with the quickness of Dontavius Russell would get more attention. But to be fair, Auburn's defensive line is loaded. Still, the senior nose guard deserves credit not just for anchoring one of the best lines in the country, but also doing his fair share of getting after it with 6.5 tackles for a loss and 3 sacks last season. He also made a decision to come back to Auburn here for his final year. And when you start thinking about him, along with Derek Brown, who I would say at this point is not underrated, he's probably properly rated as one of the top guys in the SEC. But does this group sort of form a tandem that you would classify as potentially the SEC's best defensive line?
I think so. And that's rough to say coming from a guy I follow Alabama and they take a lot of pride in their defensive linemen and Raekwon Davis and Isaiah Buggs. I think you've got to look at a couple of different linemen too. I think LSU's got some guys in place. They could make a run at that towards the end. We don't know much about Braden Fehoko just yet, but we expect him to be very good. But it just seems like top to bottom. You include the linebackers in that. You've got Derek Brown. You've got Marlon Davidson. You've got Nick Coe. You've got Moultrie. You've got Big Cat Bryant. I mean, it's like a revolving door. I mean, they really, year after year, it was Carl Lawson 2 years ago. Now it's Jeff Holland stepping out. But it just seems like no matter who they seem to plug in at Auburn, there's always somebody right behind them that looks and plays just like them.
Joshua Rogers in the YouTube comment section says Auburn's defensive line is the best in the SEC. Brian Hard reminds us also add Marcavius to Big Cat Bryant to that group as well, who's the fast-rising prospect from out of Cordele, Georgia. Dontavius Russell, though, does seem to be a big factor in all of this, and as I said, he made the decision to kind of come back to Auburn here and be a part of what's going to go down in 2018. And before the Peach Bowl against UCF, he sort of took a moment to describe his decision, explain why it was he wanted to remain a part of what's happening defensively for the Tigers. Here is Dontavius Russell.
That's the main thing I was thinking about is we will, at least for now, we know that we'll have at least 3 guys back from our starting defensive line. And I just think whenever you're able to do that, it's always going to be beneficial. And when a group is able to play together and get to know each other, have the chemistry with each other, and know what each player may do, and I just think that's real beneficial. And that's what I think is we're going to be one of our strengths of our defensive lines, that we have played together, and we won't have to rebuild a defensive line.
So these guys have been there for a while. They're playing together. They have that chemistry. And what this really speaks to is, and this is a shocker for me. I mean, I've said this before. I did not think Kevin Steele was a good hire by Auburn when it was made. But Steele has done big work with the Tigers. And the example of what's happening here at the defensive line may be the best overall proof of that. The fact that he is, and now these were big-time recruits. Russell was a one-time UGA commit. These are all, big names off the recruiting trail. But the fact that for the most part they're panning out, I think it does speak well of Kevin Steele. Better DC than Will Muschamp wasn't at Auburn, and a lot better than, like, say, Brian Van Gorder, some of the guys that sort of transitioned through there. Kevin Steele has outperformed what you thought of as the typical defensive standard for Auburn under Gus Malzahn.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear those names come up. I had Van Gorder with the Falcons, and Kevin Steele was obviously at Alabama when I was
That's a good point.
Alabama
good
football
point.
team. It's interesting to hear those names come up, and I do have to give Kevin Steele credit, because I saw this quote from Kevin Steele, and really what he's gone out and said is, hey, listen, if you're waiting until your stars graduate, then you're not in a good spot. And they have not done that. They've gone out, and year after year. It's like I said, 2 years ago we wondered, hey, who's going to replace Carl Lawson? Then it was, now it's who's going to replace Jeff Holland. Now all of a sudden you look at names like Nick Coe, and you look at Moultrie and some of these other guys, they're not going to miss a beat. And really, really all across their front seven have had some stars.
Cliff Nelson has a good comment in the YouTube comment section, or certainly an interesting comment in the comment section that'll spur on some debate. We'll hear that in a moment. For now, though, speaking of Kevin Steele, the defensive coordinator having great success with the Tigers, here is Dontavius Russell from at the end of the calendar year talking about why he likes Kevin Steele and what makes him impressive as Auburn's DC. Here's more from Russell.
Before Coach Steele got here, it was always a different defensive coordinator coming in for me, and he was the first guy to be around for more than a couple semesters for me. So I just feel like knowing how he does things and what he'll call, and knowing his defense well, because now you don't have to learn a new defense. You're able to become comfortable in the defense that you run. I just feel like that's beneficial, and that's what has been helping us continue to grow and have more success.
So Cliff Nelson in the YouTube comment section says Auburn's defensive line may be good, but I think Georgia, Alabama, LSU's defensive line are all better. How does Auburn sort of fit into that Georgia, Alabama, LSU group? Now, I think all those groups are really pretty good. Y'all know I'm not incredibly high on LSU for this season, but up front defensively, they probably do have some stuff going on. For instance, I think that Braden Fehoko, the Texas Tech transfer, I think he makes an impact over there defensively, especially up front. I like LSU a lot. So how do you think Auburn sort of fits into that discussion with Alabama and Georgia and LSU?
I think that the ability is there for any one of those three groups to, at the end of the year, possibly look a lot better on paper than Auburn. I think that that's a possibility. When you look at what, and Cliff mentions the name Clavon Chason, I really thought Clavon Chason a year ago was going to have a breakout year. The whole mixture of Arden Key kind of being in, kind of being out, kind of not being 100% has really changed my opinion of that. But I think, you put Lawrence in there, you put Braden Fehoko, you put all the depth they could have at LSU, and I think it could be a good thing. But for right now, my money, it's like a revolving door for me at Auburn. It's like they keep multiplying on the sideline and keep spitting in fresh defensive linemen that are just as good as the one in front of them. And so from a talent perspective, with the depth they have, they're going to get my vote for now.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And it's one of the reasons why it's one of the reasons why that SEC West, it's not what it was in 2014. We referenced Dak Prescott earlier.
Right.
2014, that was a grizzly bear. It's not quite as deep as it was in 2014. But the commenter Cliff mentioned them. All those good defensive lines. I think you add Texas A&M into that. I think A&M's got a good defensive line. I think Mississippi State's got a good defensive line. Of the 7 teams in the SEC West, the only teams that don't have surefire, tough, really tough defensive lines, very hard to run on, Ole Miss and Arkansas. Everybody else, it's a bring your lunch pail type of situation there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Texas A&M too. I'm looking for Dalen Mack. I mean, he's made me a believer. I'm trying to make everybody else a believer. Let's do this all together, Dalen Mack. You need to step out. Him and Kingsley Kike, however you say that last name. These have got to be a couple of guys to me that really can send that team to the next level.
In the Facebook comment section, India Anderson bringing up kind of some breaking news here, more bad news for Florida in comparison to its head-to-head recruiting with Florida State right now. A defensive end from Tucker, Georgia, Derek McClendon, has committed to Florida State here over Florida. So kind of a that's one that Florida would have maybe liked to have had here. Another big win for Florida State here, jumping out and getting Derek McClendon from what is really a powerhouse in the Atlanta area. Tucker.
Yeah, no, Tucker, Georgia, obviously right down the street, and I think that moves Florida State. Does that move them up to 11 right now?
Oh Lord, don't ask me to do the math.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, and we talked about this yesterday.
Yeah.
The state of Florida, the Florida State, Miami, Mark Richt. I mean, even looking at Charlie Strong, even looking at some of the other things. Florida's got to kick it into gear. I'm just telling you that. And you brought this up a minute ago about Tennessee, how they stay in the news in a positive manner. It's like no matter who the commitment is, at least it's something rolling in the right direction. Florida's got to find that. I mean, they're grasping for something positive right now. Even the guys they're getting aren't that special. It's tough for me, I'm telling you.
Also, another recruiting story that's relatively late breaking, and in the comments section, who was it? Steve Quinn was asking to bring this up. South Carolina adds a four-star wide receiver to its crop today. Kevion Mullins from Memphis, Tennessee, has committed to South Carolina here. I don't know what happened to Jeremy Pruitt closing the borders in Memphis. All I hear about is kids from Memphis going everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened with that, but South Carolina also adds a four-star receiver here today. Listen, y'all can sleep on Muschamp if you want. He is a good recruiter.
Yeah, not only that, but when you look at their average recruit that's coming in there, you have to give him, first of all, you have to give him credit for Zach Pickens. You have to look at also the transfers they've gotten. The kid out of Clemson, the defensive lineman. I mean, it's hard to argue against Will Muschamp right now, and it just makes it more even a head scratcher what's going on in Florida.
The state, which does a good job covering South Carolina recruiting, has given Ryan Holinsky, the quarterback commit from South Carolina, we talk about from a good bit here on the show. They're giving him some of the credit for landing Mullins, which makes a lot of sense. Holinsky's been a big-time recruiter for South Carolina. I think his commitment to South Carolina seems stronger than ever. I don't think he's a flip candidate at the moment, even though there had been a little bit of drama with him a few weeks ago. And when the quarterback who's fast rising on the boards is really tightly committed, wide receivers and offensive linemen, things like that have a tendency to follow.
Well, not only that, but it's like you mentioned yesterday, there's only so many quarterbacks out there this year in terms of who's going to be taking people with them. There's not really there's only a handful of generational type quarterbacks or really upper echelon type guys. These wide receivers are going to start following these guys. They know that's where their money's made at.
All right, let's do item number 9 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I thought that Ross Dellinger, who actually used to cover LSU, now works for Sports Illustrated, an interesting profile on Mississippi State quarterback Nick Fitzgerald. And it sounds like, based on the headline alone and some of the language in here, they're really expecting big things out of Fitzgerald in Starkville. Let me give you an example of one of the things they're working on with Fitzgerald here this season for 2018. Dellinger writes that Fitzgerald's arm is what excites Joe Moorhead, that's the head coach, and passing game coordinator Andrew Briner. I think that's how you say his last name. They plan to use it more than Dan Mullen did, and they hope to develop that further in that area. Briner believes the two statistics most relevant to winning and losing are turnover margin and explosive plays. This spring, Briner was putting those types of things to use in drills to improve the long passes from Nick Fitzgerald. That's Ross Dellinger explaining that at Sports Illustrated. The other thing that Dellinger wrote about was that in addition to working on some of those long passes, they're also spending some time developing more of an RPO type deal there, which apparently wasn't as big a part of the Dan Mullen offense as it's maybe going to be under Joe Moorhead. Right. And back during the spring, Moorhead did explain the notion of RPOs and how Nick Fitzgerald might factor into that. Moorhead took some time to explain exactly what all that was about. Let me let you hear Joe Moorhead on that subject.
People kind of assume that it has something to do with throwing the ball, and in a way it does. But to me, the run pass option or adding tags is a way to neutralize defensive numbers. Because to me, the run game comes down to three things: numbers, angles, and graphs. Where are the best numbers? Where are the best angles for your blockers? And how do you get your speed into open space? And I think the thing with the tags and the RPOs and post-snap reading second and third level defenders, it allows you to throw the ball if the 7th or 8th defender is able to tackle the ball carrier if you hand them off. And if he isn't, you're able to hand the ball off, and you're blocking 6 for 6 or 5 for 5. So, I think that's one of the reasons, Saquon, Chase Edmonds before that at Fordham, and even going back to Jordan Todman, Dennis Kennedy at Akron, that we've had running backs who've either led the league or been, in the top 2 in rushing, because we don't hand the ball off to our backs when there's people at the line of scrimmage we can't block.
So it's interesting from Joe Moorhead, kind of nice that he goes into the description there what the RPO stuff is. When you think about those kinds of plays, the deep passing plays that Ross Dellinger wrote about in the quote that we read, the headline jumps out at you, better than ever before. Is Joe Moorhead going to do more with Nick Fitzgerald than Dan Mullen did? Because under Mullen, he was actually already pretty good.
Yeah, no, this is what's scary for me for Mississippi State fans, though, right? I mean, listen, they've got all these returning starters coming back, a dominant defensive line, a pretty good offensive line, so not very good receivers, but a decent, secondary, decent linebacking core, all these guys coming back. It scares me to think that Moorhead's going to change what Nick Fitzgerald is, though. Does it not? I mean, does that not scare Mississippi State fans? It's like, hey, Nick Fitzgerald, there's a reason he was already mentioned in some of these categories. We're going to ask him to do something that he's not already kind of good at, right? I mean, we're going to try to change what his game is at this point in his career. I think that makes me nervous for Mississippi State fans. I think, listen, if you're looking at passing quarterbacks, Keaton Thompson sitting right behind him that has proven that he can pass the quarterback around, but I don't know that I look at Nick Fitzgerald and think air raid style. I think that obviously you want the plays, that you can get down the field and you want to be able to pass the ball over top, and he mentions explosive plays, but if I'm Joe Moorhead, err on the side of caution of knowing what Nick Fitzgerald is.
All right, item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We mentioned this off the very top of the show, and we wanted to talk about it here for a moment. Just a disaster for Arkansas last night in the College World Series. Now, this is not SportsCenter. We don't have, the kind of budget to be showing you all the highlights from this game and things like that. But I'll see if I can recreate it. It's a foul ball beyond first base near the chalk line there, and it's a convergence of some infielders. First baseman's over, right fielder's over, second baseman comes over, and no one's there to make the catch. Ball lands. Batter stays, at the plate, ends up hitting a home run that put Oklahoma State ahead. They go on to win the game. I just hate this for Arkansas so much. I am rooting for the Hogs to win this series. I think that athletic department, those fans, could use a championship right now. Hated to see this last night. It was just a devastating moment for the Hogs here.
I mean, I'm telling you guys know I'm a gambler. I had some money on the line in this game, pretty big number of money, and I'm sitting there watching and thinking, oh, this is it. Oh, the game. And I can't even imagine what their fans were going through at the same time. That was rough, man.
Jamie Blanton says about the second baseman who came over to make the play, he was trying to be a hero. He had no business being there. First baseman's ball all day, and he had to have it. Now, you've played some baseball. I mean, do you see it the way that Jamie does? To me, it just looked like three guys hustling, but then not communicating. I didn't see the second baseman trying too hard to be a hero, but then again, I didn't watch it that closely either.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's just one of those Bermuda Triangle kind of things where it's like, hey, we can't all sprint right at each other and meet at the ball. It's just not going to work like that. So you do hope that somebody kind of takes advantage and calls everybody else
The
off.
second baseman in question is Carson Shaddy. He's already tweeted out today sort of his thoughts as you head towards the rubber match tonight. Today's my last time to put on the red and white. I promise you that my last game as a Hog will be played at the highest intensity that I've ever played. Today's not about feeling sorry for ourselves. Today's about overcoming adversity and coming out as national champions. Could we agree as an audience to root for Arkansas tonight? Or is there any group of SEC fans that ain't doing that?
No,
I mean, did we hear some of our LSU folks, they were rooting
Cliff
for him?
said he was rooting for Arkansas.
I mean, is there any group of SEC fans who say, I can't root for Arkansas tonight?
I think if it was Vanderbilt, it'd be different.
A&M,
if it was Vanderbilt, it'd be different, right? If Vanderbilt was playing for the title, it'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't like Vanderbilt baseball.
Right, but I think Arkansas is fine.
Yeah, I think people can buy into that, right?
I'm on board.
All right, so hopefully that works out well. All right, here on the show every day, we always like to close things out the same way. We're always looking for champions of life. And today, now you're a former NFL guy. You got millions on top of millions. Maybe this is no big deal to you. But I saw where Floyd Mayweather put on Instagram that he's apparently from Jacob the Jeweler here, purchased an $18 million watch. Is that watch worth $18 million? First of all, it looks like a girl's watch. What are we doing? What are we doing here?
Let me go ahead and stop you. There's no watch worth $18 million, right? I mean, like there ain't no watch worth $18 million.
I don't
care
even
what
think
it is.
that looks nice.
No, it's just absolutely. It disgusts me, honestly. $18
I mean,
million.
younger people in the room than me. Does this watch even look good to y'all? It's tacky, right?
Tacky. I'm not trying to be a hater, but it's disgusting.
He bought that thing. You like it? Michael Shalaba is just the worst.
Yeah.
He's the absolute worst person
is,
I know. He has the worst taste in everything.
Jeez,
I mean, he bought that thing for $18 million. I don't think he could sell it for $100,000.
No. I don't think he could either.
Depreciation.
Who's he going to sell it to? Nobody wants that.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody else is willing to spend money like that.
All right, we always love when you're with us here on SEC Country Live. Podcast's going to be up right after our show is over. Of course, we always appreciate when you share the show, let folks know that we're out here. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll look forward to talking to you the next time right here on SEC Country Live.